Women's Month, a time for celebrating the strength and achievements of women across the country. But a recent opinion piece by Section 27 raises a crucial question. Do these celebrations ring hollow when women are still shouldering the weight of our underfunded education system? This piece said to highlight how women are forced to stretch child support grants to cover basic necessities like transport as well as food, while often working low-paid or even underpaid or unpaid jobs to keep both households and classrooms running. Our guest this morning argues that this invisible labor absorbs the cost of state failures and that a truly meaningful tribute to women would be real political will as well as investment in education. Joining us to discuss this is Matshidiso Lencoasa, a budget analyst then from Section 27. Matshidiso, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it as well. It's a dire situation that has just continued and continued to grow. Won't you just detail it for us?
Yes, thank you very much, Arabile, and good morning to all the viewers. So yes, I think it is definitely because this is a month that is marked by all these flashy campaigns and speeches around, the power and the resilience of women. But, I think that in order to make it more than just words or rhetoric, we need to do better for the women of our country who are doing so much in our society to keep our society together. And this year's Women Month piece, we wanted to narrow in on the perspective on education. And so what we've seen is over the past few years, there's been a disinvestment in education. So there have been both real cuts to education budget and nominal cuts. And how that has manifested is that we see teachers who are mostly women in our country teaching in conditions that are actually quite dire, where schools are falling apart, classrooms are falling apart, and there are about 60 learners in one classroom, which really is unacceptable. We've seen, and that teacher is made to fill the gap, underpaid as she is, to fill the gap of a state that has not invested in overcoming overcrowding, to give good quality education, to shape the minds of the futures of people in our country. We extend this also to other situations like scholar transport, which we looked at in our opinion piece, is that when there is a breakdown in scholar transport, which we've seen across the provinces, Limpopo, Northwest, Gauteng this year, what this actually means is that the mothers, most of whom are on child support grants or who are, precariously employed, are taking the very little that they have to make due for the state not investing in scholar transports and taking learners to school. Because if the mothers don't do that, then those learners are not actually going to be able to go to school, or they will go to school in harsh conditions like we've seen across the country. So that really has been the concern that we have, and that's what we illustrated in our opinion piece.
Somebody else may come back and say, well, but education is one of the most funded, the most highest funded single item on South Africa's budget. So is it just about the effective use of this budget that clearly has fallen away, or is it just because we're ignoring the elements that matter most now?
Absolutely, and I think that's a really good question. When it comes to analyzing budget, fiscal policy, and in investments in social spending areas, we need to be looking at both the quantum of spend, so how much money gets allocated to these areas, as well as the quality of spend. Does every single rand end up going to the intended beneficiaries, to the learners, and to the people who are holding the education system together? What we've actually seen is that we have a problem of both. So it's not just one or the other, but it is actually both. So on an allocation perspective, we've seen that government has, over the past few years, reduced investments in education outside of this year's budget, which, had the whole VAT increase, which was, controversial. But over the past few years, what has happened is that there's been a decrease in investment. So what we see is that there are fewer teachers. I think the Western Cape announced that they would be reducing 2,300 teacher posts. The education teacher assistant program has been sometimes suspended at times because of lack of funding. And that has real life consequences because it means that there's overcrowding and poorer quality basic education. And it also means that learners have to share textbooks, among others. Then on the other hand, we have the other problem, which is that provinces, the little money that they do get towards education, we often see things like wasteful expenditure, but also underspending. So we have provinces who return money back to national department who then reallocate it to provinces that can actually spend the money. And so our call isn't, just more money, but it's also saying that if we want to do right by the women of the country, especially those who are holding the education system together, we need to ensure that we invest strategically in education and, in the education system, but also ensure that every single rand that is invested actually goes to the intended beneficiary. So we're in support of, it's not an either or, but it's actually both.
But we've also had the gender budget statement, right? And one wonders that may actually be National Treasury's furthest step yet in trying to ensure that they recognize women in budgeting. Has that worked at all? Is that a step that helps but hasn't gone far enough?
Yes, so the gender budget statement is one that we welcome and we reflected upon in our opinion piece. And it is true that that is some form of progress because, if you compare it to previous iterations of the budget where there hasn't been a reflection of how different people in our country experience the budget. So not just women, but how different marginalized communities experience budget decisions. And so we welcome this gender budget statement, but we're really calling for it to go even further so that we can actually do more than pay lip service to women in our country. One example of doing that is to recognize education. So currently the areas that are looked at in the gender budget statement include the Department of Trade and Industry, for instance, which are welcomed. It's very important to empower women economically, but a lot of economic participation or the site of women empowerment is also education. And so if we really want this gender budget statement to really serve the women in our country, especially those who are holding the education system together, a powerful way to do that is to expand the gender budgeting that Treasury is doing to include crucial sectors like education, but also like healthcare as well.
Yeah, absolutely important. Then what would you need to see, particularly in the budget, if I may ask then continuously about that, in order to see a change in wanting women empowerment a little bit more and showing success in empowering women, particularly in our budget? What would you like to see exactly?
Yes, so there are different areas of the budget that we can look at. And I think because this year we decided to focus on education, because a lot of the times people think about the power of education in itself for girl learners, but don't actually consider the women who are holding the education system together to ensure that the future generation of learners are empowered. I think that what we'd like to see is sustained investment above inflation, investment towards education areas, including areas like textbooks, for instance. Textbooks and stationery have been receiving budget cuts. Those, and what happens there is when the state pulls funding from for those resources, it is the mothers, many of whom who are not working, who fill that burden, who fill that gap, which we've seen in a gendered society as ours. So that's one example of it, is definitely ensuring that we invest enough. The second one, which we spoke about earlier, is ensuring that every single rand of investment actually goes to the people in this country, particularly women in this country. And that means investing in capacity building and consequence management when provinces or municipalities do not spend the money that is supposed to be going towards empowering women or empowering people in this country, communities across the country. So those are just some of the ways that the government could actively invest in that. And I think overall, it's just about, putting forward or proposing a budget that works. So, this year, there've been decisions like either first it was the VAT increase and then later it was the fuel levy increase. A budget that works is one that actually National Treasury considers. When we increase the fuel levy, for instance, this is the impact that it has on people, that it has on, for instance, the child support grants or the 370 Rand grants or the SASSA grants. Like, where does this money actually go? And this is what we're going to do to ensure that our budget actually advances gender equity and equity in our country rather than undermines it. So those are just some of the interventions that we would like to see Treasury put forward to build a public sector, particularly an education sector that works for all, including women in our country.
Do you think government's listening?
Yes, so this has been interesting. I think when it comes to when it comes to budget issues, the budget often takes quite a while because it's, quite rigid and it's quite sensitive also, taxes, debt, those are quite sensitive issues for people in our country. And so for a long time, it felt that, we were just talking into the air, talking into the abyss. But recently, I would actually say that there has been improvements. I think we've seen, for example, there's actually a gender budget statement, which you had referenced earlier in our conversation. I think that's quite huge. We've never seen that in our country. And as civil society, we had, and, I can talk about Section 27's work, we had consistently advocated for a gender budget statement and gender responsive budgeting for many years now. So that has been hopeful. And also, it just seems for the first time that this year, National Treasury seems more open to engaging with civil society and with communities. And so I think that we should definitely take our gains where we can and use them to just continue the momentum of building a public sector that works for everyone. Of course, there are still ways that we could improve, and I really do hope that government is tuning in and listening, and not just listening to us as civil society, but listening to the women who use public services and who are definitely impacted by that. And one of the most powerful ways that Treasury could do that and government could do that is to actually workshop gender budget statement and gender responsive budgeting in communities so that the budget is shaped by the people, for the people, and people understand, or people are able to hold accountable governments. When government says we're allocating this much money to your local clinic, you can say, oh, this much was allocated towards hiring nurses, but there's only 1 or 2 nurses that are on duty, for instance, or this was allocated towards hiring a number of teachers. But when we see this, we still see learners, up to 60 learners in one classroom. So I think that we have made progress this year because it's been quite a tumultuous budget cycle that only, that was only approved really a few weeks ago. But I think that we can go further, and I really do call on government to listen to the people of our country so that we can build a public sector that can secure the futures of people in our country, but also ensure that it is not just, flashy speeches and campaigns for women, but it actually is, we're actually doing everything that we can to empower women in our country who are currently holding many of our public services together.
An important message indeed. Matshidiso, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it, and certainly hope that the message is heard. A clear one indeed. Matshidiso Lencoasa, who's the budget analyst at Section 27.